Welcome everyone to another episode of Humble History. I am your host, Ko, and I'm joined today by my guest, Aaron. And today we're continuing our exploration of US history. So tell me, Aaron, any questions on your mind lately? Actually, I do. I've just recently watched Christopher Nolan's latest box office hit, Oppenheimer. It's about the life of Robert Oppenheimer, the man who led the Manhattan Project that resulted in the creation of the atomic bombs. While his story was already interesting enough, what intrigued me further was the US's decision to use the bombs on a civilian population. Can you explain to me why America resorted to that method? Of course. Well, the decision was largely influenced by the aftermath of the Battle of Okinawa. Some historical context. As you already know, at first the US wanted nothing to do with the war. They were already recovering from a depression. That was until the Pearl Harbor attack forced their hand. America then started building up its military forces and resources. They participated in numerous battles across the Pacific theater, such as the Battle of Midway and the Normandy landings, also known as D-Day. With each victory, the Axis powers slowly collapsed, and the war was coming to an end. The US stopped the Japanese expansion in the Pacific, and Okinawa Island proved to be Japan's last bastion of defense to end the war. Thus, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater was about to begin. Of course, the Japanese weren't going to go down so easily. After all, the Battle of Okinawa is also known as the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. Why the moniker? Well, you have to consider that the Japanese were very fierce and tenacious. Okinawa's capture was vital to the US, as it would provide airfields and naval bases close to Japan. The Japanese's ferocity stemmed from their reverence for the emperor, whom they referred to as Arihitogami, meaning incarnation of a god. This veneration cultivated extreme patriotism and willingness among the Japanese to sacrifice their lives for the divine ruler. Moreover, this reverence also influenced the Japanese leaders' choice to continue fighting rather than surrendering, hoping to inflict enough casualties on the Allies to negotiate better terms that would protect the emperor. That's why the Japanese soldiers used kamikaze attacks and even forced civilians to fight. Some even resorted to suicide rather than surrendering. They were indeed very extreme with their methods. So how did the Okinawans feel about the war? Well, most of them didn't want to fight. I've read a personal account from an article by Masako Shinjo Summers Robbins, who was drafted by the Japanese military as a combat nurse during the battle. She hid in cave shelters and witnessed the US Navy ships firing cannons from offshore onto the nearby villages. She recalls Japanese soldiers seizing food from Okinawan homes and killing a family for hiding a small amount of rice. One time, Japanese soldiers killed a baby in a cave shelter because its crying might attract enemy attention. Oh my god, that's terrible. Having your home be bombed while also being treated as expendable by your own military? That must have been a horrific experience. Yes, it sure was. Unluckily, or maybe luckily, Masako was captured by American soldiers while hiding in a sugarcane field, which might have ensured her survival as a prisoner of war instead. And how did the Americans feel? What did they experience? Well, here's a recounting from interviews with World War II veterans conducted by the National World War II Museum. Charles L. Red Womack was the squad leader of Company M, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, 1st Division. His unit was deployed onto Okinawa to assault and clear out tombs, cave complexes, and bunkers across the island. He mentioned the mission being more difficult compared to the Battle of Peleliu and the Battle of New Britain. During one of his operations, he witnessed Japanese soldiers in cave complexes using the Okinawan civilians as human shields. Another time, Womack recalls walking by some Okinawan civilians and seeing them bow to the Marines. Through his service, he's seen the ferocious fighting spirit of the Japanese and experienced vastly differing challenges compared to his time on other battlefields. One of the struggles he mentions was scavenging for chicken and eggs, then using C4 to heat the eggs. Can you imagine that? Using explosives to cook your food? I couldn't. Anyway, Womack was lucky enough not to be injured during the entirety of his service, and Okinawa had no long-lasting effect on him. Good for him. The same can be said for many others, though. Yeah, unfortunately. Well, after a 3-month-long campaign, from April 1st to June 21st of 1945, the battle ended with a decisive American victory, but the cost was immense. Approximately 50,000 Allied casualties and around 100,000 Japanese military deaths. The battle showed the US the ferocity and stubbornness of Japanese resistance and influenced them to reconsider a direct invasion of Japan. The Allied forces gave Japan an ultimatum: surrender or suffer prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese government rejected the proposal, causing President Truman to agree to the use of the new successfully tested atomic bombs, and thus, Fat Man and Little Boy were dropped onto the city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, instantly evaporating more than 200,000 Japanese civilians. I see. Was there really no other way to make the Japanese surrender? Well, Truman always stood by his decision, even years after his presidency. He and many others defending the bombings argued that the potential cost of lives and resources from the continued fighting would outweigh the lives of the Japanese civilians. They say the atom bombs were the only way to achieve unconditional surrender from Japan. Others against the bombings argued that it was unnecessary, as Japan was already on the verge of surrendering. They say that the bombings were merely a show of America's military power, and that there were alternative options to ending the war. It sure is hard to know whether the bombings were justified, isn't it? Yes, it is, my friend. The moral question of the bombings remains a subject for debate, while the usage of nuclear warfare set a precedent for global negotiations and became a huge factor in the following Cold War. The aftermath of the Battle of Okinawa has had long-lasting impacts that continue to affect international relations and military strategies to this day and for decades to come. Wow, that's quite a perspective. I hadn't really considered how deeply the Battle of Okinawa still affects us today. Well, thank you for your informative insight today. It's been a pleasure. Likewise. It's been great having you on the show today, Aaron. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found our conversation enlightening and thought-provoking. Thanks again, and we'll catch you all on the next episode of Humble History.